Hi, I'm Julia Keister, and I am from Tacoma Park, Maryland. My pronouns are she, they, and I identify as queer. I moved to Covington, Kentucky in 2014. I followed my then girlfriend who I met in New York City, and she had moved to Cincinnati, and we did long distance for a while, and in true girlfriend fashion, I followed her here, and we ended up in Covington. Also, very true to form, my now wife, her name is Hannah. We met at a party that an ex-girlfriend was throwing, who said, "You would really like this new person I met." And I said, "No, I'm good. I don't want to be connected via you." But we ended up at the same party, and it was like immediate spark. So I now thank my ex for that. Yeah, so I moved here from Brooklyn, New York, and there I was a special ed teacher for 10 years. And so when I moved here, I kind of wanted to stay in that field, and I started to work at a nonprofit in Covington called The Point, and I was doing coaching, some teaching still, and job placement for all different types of people with differing abilities. And I was there for a few years. And in that time, I'm also a home cook, and I started to make bagels for myself at home out of desperation for a good bagel after moving here from New York. And I was bringing them to work at The Point, and people started to say, "Oh, can you make some for this and make some for that?" And so I was making more and more. And then The Point actually opened a coffee shop. And so they said, "Oh, we should sell your bagels at the coffee shop." And then a whole different business took off, which was called Lil's Bagels. And I owned that business for about 6 years, which started at The Point Coffee, grew into farmers markets, and then grew into a brick and mortar in Covington also. And then we were in kind of sad news. We were forced out of our Covington building due to rent gouging, basically. But we always had our community, and one big piece of that for us were our neighbors at Roebling Books. We were always basically siblings and helping each other, constantly growing together. And so when we were forced out of our building, we kind of looked at one another and said, "Do you want to join forces?" And everyone said, "Yeah." And so we were able to bring a lot of our team to the bookstore, and we really have blended completely. Some people from the Lil's Bagel Shop are now doing books. Some people are baristas. And then we just opened a food location at the third Roebling Books location, which is in Dayton, Kentucky. And we hope to bring food to each location. So, and the menu has a lot of ties to the original Lil's menu. No bagels, though. But yeah. So Lil's is named after my grandmother, who people always say, "Oh, was it her recipe?" And I say, "No, she only made hot dogs and tuna salad." But she was the person, growing up Jewish, she was the person who was like, "This is a good bagel. Don't eat any of these." So I always say she's the person who taught me like what a good bagel is and what it should taste like. Yeah, so it started in 2016. And that was really in the days where we were at farmers markets. My wife basically runs New Riff Distillery, which is a bourbon distillery, and they had a catering kitchen. So I was able to make all of the bagels and cream cheeses, et cetera, in the catering kitchen until we got our brick and mortar. I always try to think of how old I was when I came out, but I was probably 23, I want to say. Which I feel like is really late because my mom came out when I was 17. So And at the moment, I think it's a really interesting story because I grew up in a super progressive family. My mom's sister, my aunt, is also gay and has been out since like the 60s. She always claims to be the founder of PETA, which I think is funny. um, and then my mom didn't come out until I was 17. And the second that she, we were in that, I'm sure anyone who has divorced parents can picture the family meeting of your parents saying that they're getting divorced. But it was really unexpected. We had no idea. And so we kind of were like, why? Because they didn't fight. There was, we couldn't see anything from like the kid perspective, but she was like, I've just always wanted to be with women. And, I just feel like I need to come out now. And like the moment that she said it, I was just like, oh my God, I'm gay. So I knew it at that moment. And I think it's really interesting that like, I didn't before then identify as gay or think I was gay, even though I like had way too close of relationships with friends and things like that, and grew up in a very liberal, progressive neighborhood, area, school, etc. There were, even then, this was like the late 90s, lots of out people. And the reason why I think it's super late for me to come out was then it was still 6 more years after my mom came out. And then I realized that I was gay, that I waited to come out. And I'm not really sure like why, but I think it has to do with that it was such a like, even though it compared to other things in the world, it wasn't a crazy trauma, but it was personally traumatic for my parents to get divorced. And because that was the reason, I think I just kind of didn't know how to do it. And I didn't really want to be the second, like, guess what? Me too, kind of thing. It was like a classic, moved in I went to school in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin. And after that, eventually ended up in New York City and was in a teaching program there. And someone who was in my teaching program and I ended up being roommates, and then we ended up dating. So she was the person that I kind of came out with to parents and everything. So, yeah. And everyone was like, yeah, we know. And my mom like threw a party. I was like, this is interesting. Yeah. So when Hannah and I were doing long distance and I was still in New York City, she was living in Northside in Cincinnati, and I would come and visit and be like, wow, this reminds me a lot of X college town, or even where I'm from, just in terms of like coffee shops, and there were queer spaces, just like little drag shows here and there, very like underground. And then like, I can't remember the name of the leather bar that was there when she lived there. Was it like the Serpent or something? Yeah. And I remember being like, let's just go. And we like walked in and we were like, whoop, like not for, like, just, we were immediately like, which one does not belong? It was us. But I remember also visiting during a Pride one year, and it probably was like 2013, and going to the Northside Tavern, and they had just like this giant Pride party, and it was really, truly queer, which was surprising to me. Just like, even around that time in New York, there were some queer spaces, but most like gay bars were really for men, it felt like. So when we went to this party in Northside, I was like, oh, that's great. Like, it really is there are queer spaces here. And then when we ended up in Covington, I just always felt like it was very genuine in its like acceptance of everyone, where I felt like in Cincinnati, Northside was like the place that really felt that way, but I didn't really feel the same way in other parts of Cincinnati. I'm not so sure that I really don't feel like I do. I still don't feel like anywhere is as accepting or truly as diverse, as welcoming to diversity as probably Covington was then, because I actually think Covington has changed in a way, or as Northside was then, and I feel like still is now. But it doesn't take long in Cincinnati for you to feel not welcome, just depending on where you are, especially in like the outer suburbs, I would say. And I still think that those like queer spaces are centered in Northside in a big way. Just like the Good Judys of the world are rare in anywhere that I've lived or visited. I think that that's just such a unique and like refreshing space that is so important for the queer community. Well, just in terms of, you know, as a business owner and being pushed out because of the cost of rents, I think that's happening to just the general public in terms of housing. Whether you rent or own a house in Covington, it's getting harder and harder. And actually, like from a, you know, personal experience, Hannah and I had a child in 2020 and our house became too small, and we wanted to move and we couldn't move somewhere else in Covington. Like it was too expensive. And so we ended up on the Cincinnati side in Walnut Hills. But just, you know, and I would say, are really, really in that middle class. So the fact that we were priced out means that there's so many other people who have been priced out. And that just like completely changes the demographic of a city when people can't live there. Because then you don't have you don't have as many different types of people going to the businesses, spending money there, investing in it, opening businesses there. And so it just, you know, it really does change the culture. Yeah. And I think like, I really do believe like Northside is pretty unique in that regard. I think it's just far enough removed from the downtown that it doesn't get like completely gentrified, even though it has changed in many, many regards. I don't think it just doesn't have that takeover that you see in other parts, because you have to commit to living, you know, a 10-15 minute drive from the like downtown Cincinnati, whereas Covington you can walk downtown from. So it's seen as almost the same as living in downtown Cincinnati. Yeah, I would say in Covington it was like we would go to Rosie's every now and again, but you have to like, you had, not anymore, but you had to be prepared for inhaling a lot of smoke, which I don't really mind, but like it is, you know, it was one of the few places that you could still smoke. And then like we always loved Crazy Fox. Like I remember going there and just being like, this is the type of like gay bar that I've always loved. You can play pool, you can play darts. It's not super expensive. It's very neighborhood like. And those were really like the two main like queer spaces, besides just, you know, anything related to Pride that we would go to, or I'm trying to think of what else was around in 2014. I really think that was it. Like, we would still go to Northside for different events, but I feel like that was maybe the time between a lot of the old gay queer spaces closing and a lot of new ones opening. So I was really excited when I lived in Covington, because I moved to Covington in June, like at the end of May, beginning of June, and I was really excited to find out that Northern Kentucky had a Pride. And either that year or the next year, I immediately was like, I want to be on the committee and help with planning it. And it's a very special Pride because it is so local and so community run. I think it's like one of my favorites just because of that reason. There's very little like corporate presence at the Northern Kentucky Pride. And like the vendors are all really local. The people in the parade are all very local. The performers, are very local too. So there's something super authentic about the Northern Kentucky Pride that you don't find a lot of places. And then, along the same lines with Cincinnati, I think the first Cincinnati Pride I went to was in 2016. And my aunt, who, like I said, came out in like the 60s, was visiting, and we were like, we're going to go to Pride. And she was like, yes. Like, she's like a 60-something-year-old that's 20, a forever 20-year-old. And we went and like watched the parade, and it was really fun. And then we went to the grounds with all the performances and the stage and the festival, I guess. And that was great because it was a bigger Pride than Northern Kentucky, but it also was accessible, where you could actually get close enough to the stage and see the performers and talk with the people standing next to you. And then, the after parties are just spread out all around the city, which makes it really unique in that way, where you go back to maybe like your neighborhood and still have like your own little Pride, separate from the big giant festival piece of it. So I think that's what's neat about just this whole area, is the community aspect of queerness and Pride that you don't get in bigger cities and you don't get in smaller towns because maybe there's not enough people. It's really the perfect size city where you feel the energy of Pride and you feel the importance of Pride, because you're not in New York where it's just like, you could be whatever and no one cares at all. You still understand what it means to be out here. It's not a super progressive place. Like, you can find your little progressive pockets, but you do know that there are people who are against who you are, also looking at you kind of at all times and maybe passing legislation against you or your children. So you know that exists. And so I think that makes Pride, and it makes queer spaces even that more important in a place of the size of Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky. And so I think that it makes Pride just really special because it's your moment to shine and be, excited about who you are and really express that. I've been on it since, I feel like it's been since 2015 or 2016. So every year. So Lil's was also, I like to believe, but I'm obviously biased, like one of those queer spaces too. And because we were a breakfast place, most breakfast and lunch place, it was a little bit different in that, like, it was an all age type of space during the day, and then we would have events in the evening. And like we had like a queer book club that still exists, burlesque shows, or something called Queer Soup Night, which is a national event, and we started the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky chapter of, and that is something actually a friend of mine started in New York, where it's a big fundraiser, and it's all suggested donation, and you have local chefs make soup, and then people give what they can, and all of the money from it goes to a local organization. So we're going to have another one at the end of April in Cincinnati. It will be the first one that's based in Cincinnati. So we really tried to be one of those queer spaces. And so we were really active in the Northern Kentucky Pride. We were like the sign-in location for the parade. So anyone who was in the parade came to Lil's to sign in, and we had a pre-party. We held the youth events there too. So that was always like really special to me, because I think just as there's so few spaces for queer adults, there's even fewer for queer kids or college students, or people who don't drink or are under the drinking age. So, we were always a big part of it from the Lil's side. And then personally, I just love to be a part of that pride, because you see the results immediately, because it is so small, and you have such an impact on pride by being in the committee. And it's really cool to see how it's grown, just in terms of, there were probably thousands of people this past year. And I remember the first year, it was kind of like, this is fun, but like, we need more people. It was kind of like everyone knew each other. And this year I went and I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like, there are so many people here, and there's no way you could know everyone. And it was another part, it was like all ages. I saw so many kids, so many teenagers, just like so happy to have a place where they felt comfortable. And I think that's the most important thing of all. Yeah, Northern Kentucky Pride is located in Covington. The parade starts at the base of the Roebling Bridge in Covington, goes throughout Covington, and then ends up in the Main Strasse area of Covington. But it tries to include as many of the, I would say, river cities on the Kentucky side, and then down to, I think, like Florence would really be as far south. I don't really know how people define Northern Kentucky, but that's kind of how I've seen it defined. And then you'll find like businesses all from those different areas usually are part of the parade or part of the festival, where they set up and sell things or pass out information and things like that. But you'll have like the other, there's like churches in it too. I don't know, it's just like people always think of Kentucky, I think, as more conservative in a way. But when you go to the Northern Kentucky Pride, it's very evident that like there are supporters throughout all those areas too, and not just the queer spaces. Like, there are a lot of businesses, organizations, schools, etc., that want to promote the equality and diversity of all people, just as much as somewhere like New York City. So that I really do think there's this like authenticity, like when friends visit from New York and they kind of they like come visit and they have like their Brooklyn like style thing going on, and like kind of this like facade up of like, I'm from New York and I'm queer, blah, blah, blah. But then I think there's something that's not as authentic about that. Like in New York, it's kind of like everyone's trying to like out queer each other. at this moment. Whereas in like Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati, people are just like, I just want to be like, I just want to be my version of queer and you be your version of queer, and like just happy to have a space together with each other. But there's not the same type of like cool queer competition as I would say it. I don't know. Maybe that's just like also the difference between like New York in general and anywhere but New York, because you kind of have to try to stand out there. Yeah, I wish I like knew names, but like I know that like Glisten, which is national, has a Northern Kentucky chapter and Cincinnati chapter. There's a church, and I'm not going to think of the name, that's like right in Covington, and they always put up these like rainbow doors during Pride, and that's, I think, very powerful for people to see that a church is doing that. And then there's a Northern Kentucky Pride Center. I feel like Northern Kentucky University has always been very supportive and had a pretty big like LGBTQ center and group. Like the library is super queer friendly, the Covington Library, which is really amazing. Like just like their selection of books, a lot of books that I think other libraries wouldn't carry because people will like complain. They put front and center, and they're really adamant about carrying books for everyone. And I think that's really awesome, and like is probably difficult in a lot of ways because they are a public space. It's different than having a business, because people see you as like the public voice at a library. And so the fact that whoever there makes those decisions says like, no, we're going to carry all of these books, I think is really amazing. That was 2015. So then I probably did get here in 2015, because I remember also being in New York when that happened. Like I remember being in both places. I don't remember specifically being at Pride then, but I do remember feeling like this is a huge moment for queer people, and also feeling like it's a huge moment, but I wish it didn't have to be like such an institution that made it a huge moment, if that makes sense. Like it wasn't like I was like, oh, fine. But like at the same time, just kind of thinking like, well, wouldn't it just be nice if you didn't get married and people saw it as like a really amazing relationship, and that didn't make it, define you kind of thing. But I do feel like that was a huge turning point in the world, in the US, just for validating queer people, because it is such a huge institution here. And I'm, now having a child, and that whole process would have been different if my wife and I couldn't have officially gotten married. And even then, like the legality around it is still kind of blurry, even though we are married. It really depends on what state you live in, even then. So still room to go. We got married in 2016. Oh, where? Actually, in where I'm from, a friend of mine owned a restaurant in Tacoma Park, and we just kind of rented out the whole space, which is really fun. I mean, I think going back to the whole Pride, the point about Pride, like I think Cincinnati is a great example of like how prides have grown and grown and grown and grown. But I do think there should be some like receipts required now at Pride, just because like in Cincinnati, like I was saying, Northern Kentucky feels much more local and a lot less corporate. And Cincinnati, you know, has grown and grown and grown and has like these amazing performers and these amazing parties and all, like it's such a big parade and the whole city shuts down, and that's great. But I do think it comes at like an expense of you needing these corporate entities to create that size of a pride. And I just think there should be more accountability for those corporations of like, cool, you get all this visibility. You can claim that you're, you know, super gay friendly and that we should like buy your credit card and shop at your stores, etc. But I do feel like we're at a point where we have, the queer community has some upper hand in that and should say, you can be in the Pride Parade and have that visibility, but, you know, you should have some type of fairness policy at your place of business in order to be in this. And like, tell us what you've done for the queer community. Tell us what you're doing, what you hope to do, so that we can promote that. Because I do think you see these giant businesses seemingly super supportive of our community on this one day. And then many of them, and not all, some, I feel like there are a lot that are walking the walk, but that we now are such a force and such a large part of the community that we should say, yeah, you know, what are you doing for us now? And I think that that's really the difference, is that the Northern Kentucky Pride, although they get sponsorships too, and some of those are corporate, they're not, you could stand in the parade and those corporations will be the rare and far, you know, like they'll be like the 1 in 10 float will be a corporation. Whereas in Cincinnati, you stand and you might watch 20 corporate floats go by and then see one local organization or one local politician or something like that. So, I mean, ideally, they just grow and grow and grow, and all the people in them are super supportive and help, you know, move society in the right direction. But I think it's kind of an interesting place right now where people are like, ooh, I want to be in your parade, you know, and I want to pass out this keychain during it. But I do think it's like a time to also say, great, like, to be in it, you have to truly be a supporter, and this is what that means. Because we're getting, you know, I feel like there were more anti-queer laws, initiatives put forth this year than ever. Like, I think I saw a recent presentation by the HRC, and that was kind of the whole message of it, was like, we're being attacked more than ever. Like, you gain freedom and people see that and kind of want to take it away. So we need the support more than ever. And so we have the ability to kind of ask that now, I think, in because Pride has become like, put a rainbow on it and we're like, you know, and we're gay friendly, and it's like, no, like, you know, can you stand up for us in all of these other areas and for kids, and, you know, you're willing to like be okay with your family member being gay, but are you okay with them being trans? And are you standing up for the whole trans community in the same way as you are for the gay community? Because that's all part of it. Sorry, go up on a soapbox. Yeah. But I think that's why I think it's really interesting, because the Northern Kentucky Parade and the Cincinnati Parade if they happened on the same day, you could point cameras and catch both of them, and they would look so completely different. And not that like one is better than the other, just that it shows you what like a bigger pride parade celebration looks like, and then a smaller one. And I do think the Northern Kentucky one has some more of a like protest element to it, which is, you know, as we always say, like pride started as a protest. And I think that that's really important to always keep with us, is that there should still be messaging behind pride. Obviously, we all want it to still be fun and a party, but there should be a message, because we are far from over the fight. Like we're in the middle of it. So yeah, that's what I would say about the two prides. I think what could be better for the queer community is really, you know, it just comes back to like creating more and more spaces that are for everyone. Definitely more spaces for youth, more resources for younger people, and just kind of acknowledging the intersections of diversity too. I think what is interesting in Cincinnati is kind of like, it's still very segregated in terms of like race and ethnicity and pride. Like the queer circles tend to be very segregated still, except for in certain spaces. Like I still would come back to Good Judy's and be like, that's a pretty like awesome cross section of everyone on, you know, the times that I have been there at least. But I think just like trying to discuss the intersectionality and make spaces that really are for everyone, or events that include different queer entities purposefully to try to make them more authentically diverse, and not just be like, it's gay, it's diverse, is I think something that Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky like really could work on. I think it's not easy to do. I think it's hard everywhere, you know, no matter what size city and no matter the makeup of a city. I think you have to be very purposeful with that. But I do think that, you know, that's somewhere where we could really grow. Yeah. So we hope to bring back a lot of the programming that we once had at the Covington Lils, and the bookstore that we've merged with has a Covington location, a Newport location, and a Dayton, Kentucky location. And so we hope to be a part of Northern Kentucky Pride, as we always have been. And then we're doing like queer story hours in the Dayton, Kentucky location, which I think will be really interesting, because I'm not sure, you don't see a lot of queer presence in Dayton, Kentucky, although it does exist, because I've been surprised how many people I've been like, yeah, we have a Dayton, Kentucky location. And they're like, I live in Dayton. And I'm like, you do? I never, you know, I never see you. And then we have Reading is Fundamental, which is our queer book club. And that has been meeting in the Covington location, but will most likely be starting to meet in the Dayton location. So that'll be really neat. We hope to partner a lot with the Newport Public Schools, because our Newport location is like blocks away from their high school. So having some type of queer space there for teenagers is really important to me. And then, you know, just having the parties too. Like we hope to have a lot of drag shows, especially in the Dayton location. And then Queer Soup Night is April 30th. Our partner for that is Cincinnati Black Pride. And so all of the proceeds from that will go to Cincinnati Black Pride. And it's actually, we're having 10 chefs, which apparently is the most that any Queer Soup Night in the country has ever had. So that's really great. And there will be an open mic, like queer stories portion of that event, and drag and burlesque. So that feels like we'll see how that event goes and try to make lots of those happening. I don't know how we'll ever top that again if we pull it off, but yeah, more to come. Like, and we're always open to being the host. So if anybody else has ideas, we just like love to be the space for people. I guess because like I feel like I really come from a very like privileged background in terms of having a parent who is queer and other family members who are queer, and like coming from a space where that was okay, that, and still I feel like it was a struggle for me, always will make me direct my attention back to youth, just because like I was a person who it should have been like just so extremely easy for, you know? And so the fact that it really wasn't, I mean, like, I feel like internally I struggled with it for a long time, and that I had the support, and it just makes me think that how many kids and teenagers are out there just like really struggling every day, and that's why like education, public spaces that are for kids like libraries, schools, bookstores, etc., should really think about their messaging and programming and how they're allowing kids to be true to themselves and learn about themselves and love themselves. I just think that is like, that's the most important thing of all, because then everyone will more and more quickly live their best life if they know from a young age that they have options and that they can realize who they are. It just, greatly affects every human. So not just, someone who's queer, but just in general, education, knowledge, and acceptance are just so important for kids. So